Well, thank you very much for allowing me to be the host of you for the first podcast.
Thank you so much for having me in the bees.
My pleasure. I became fascinated with bees when we did an episode of Fear Factor where we had to cover these people in bees. And it was this outdoor thing that we did at this ranch. And while we were doing it, a local hive of bees came over and interacted with our bees, and we had to shut down production. And so I talked to the beekeeper. I said, what's going on? And he said, we have to shut everything down for an hour or so while they work this out. And
while the bees work it out.
Yeah, I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, they're going to communicate because these bees are trying to figure out why these bees are here, why our bees are there. And I go, they're going to communicate? Like, is it going to be a bee war? He's like, no, they're going to sort it out. And I'm like, how do they sort it out? And it's kind of unknown, right? Like, how...
Sure. Well, what happened with those bees?
They sorted it out.
And
the other bees went away, and our bees came back and stayed, and then we resumed the show.
That's great.
So, what kind of communication are bees capable of? Do we know?
We don't know everything there is to know about bees. Bees have been around for 120 million years. We've been keeping bees for maybe 10,000. You know, if I were to think I knew more than the bees, that would be so foolish of me. But we do know some of the ways that bees communicate. They communicate through scents, through pheromones a lot, through these chemical signals that they're sending out to the entire colony to let this colony that's a superorganism know what's going on. And so in your case, you know, you had one colony of bees. A colony is a collective noun, is the collective noun for a group of bees, whereas a hive is the box they live in. So you had these two colonies, you know, who met and were trying to make sure they all stayed together and they all stayed with their queen and went to the right place. And, you know, it sounds like you had a bunch of bees in one area, and bees are social creatures, so they were attracted to the scents of these other bees and were there to see what's going on. And, you know, they eventually figured it out and everybody went back to their respective places, and it was fine.
So what is happening though when they're figuring it out? They're smelling that is it that these other bees have a specifically different pheromone?
Yes, they will have a different scent, and that's how they'll stay with their colony. And it comes from the queen. The queen has a queen mandibular pheromone, and so she is sending out scent signals, pheromones to the colony, and they're always communicating with each other. And the queen and the worker bees have this wonderful system of checks and balances to make sure that everything gets done within the hive and that the colony is doing what it needs to.
Is it possible that bees who are like loner bees could integrate with another hive?
Absolutely. You know, it happens to me in my work all the time. I remove bees from places, and, you know, I'll go in and take a colony and a hive out and relocate it to my apiary. And in that process, I don't always get every bee, of course, and the bees that are left behind, or if there's a loner bee, they can join another colony. And it's actually, their chances of successfully joining are increased if they bring gifts of pollen or honey, so.
Whoa. Wow.
But, you know, bees live a very short lifespan, so sometimes they'll just live out the rest of their bee life. And the bees that we see out in the world foraging, they're at the end of their short bee life.
How long is a bee's life?
So a worker bee, and we're talking about honeybees, Western honeybees, the ones you see me keep, the lifespan of a female worker bee varies throughout the year. So in the spring and summer, when the bees are working their hardest, the female worker bees will only live about 6 weeks. In the winter, when they're not doing quite as much, and when we need more bees to make it through the winter, they'll live a little bit longer, and they'll live about 6 months. And their bodies actually change in the winter. The bees that are born later in the year and need to make it through the winter will have more fat bodies on them so that they can make it through the dearth when there's nothing in bloom and when bees are living off the honey that they collected or stored in their hive earlier in the year.
And how long does the queen live?
The queen can live the longest. She can live about 5 years. That's on the longer end. Most queens will live a little bit shorter, but she can live significantly longer than all the other bees in the hive. And then we have the worker bees who live about 6 weeks, 6 months. The queen bee can live up to 5 years, and the drone bees will live about 6 months, the male bees.
And what is the ratio of male bees to female bees?
A honeybee colony is about 95% female, and the amount of male bees can actually fluctuate throughout the year. So when we need male bees around to mate with a queen, and they'll mate with a queen, not their queen, but when we need more male bees around, the colony will produce more male bees. In the winter, when there aren't as many resources available to the bees, the female bees will kick all the male bees out of the hive, and they'll either starve or freeze to death. So right now, there are no male bees in most hives. And these bees that came along with me today, there's not a single male honeybee there.
They starve to death.
They starve to death. They have no way of foraging. They don't do the work of bees. So most people have never seen a male honeybee before, and that's just because male honeybees are out in the world doing the work of bees. They stay in the hive, or they leave and they go to drone congregation areas to mate with a queen, but they're not going to be on a flower or in your wine glass or whatnot.
So the male bees don't mate with their own females. Would that be like mating with the mother?
That would be like incestuous, right?
Oh.
So here's what happens within the colony when it's time for the queen bee to mate. So once a queen bee is born, when she reaches the ripe age of about 7 days old, she'll go on a mating flight, and she may go on only 1, possibly 2 mating flights in her entire life. And she'll fly out of the hive, and she'll go to a drone congregation area, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's an area where there's a bunch of drone male honeybees flying around just waiting for a queen bee to fly by. And these drone congregation areas exist about 100 feet in the sky, which is another reason you would never see a male honeybee. But if a queen bee flies by, the fastest, strongest drones win, and they will successfully mate with a queen. And the queen will mate with only about 15 to 20 drone bees, and she'll have enough sperm to last the rest of her life. And what happens to the male bees is once they mate with a queen, their endophallus rips out of their abdominal cavity and they fall to the ground, and that's the end of their little bee life.
Whoa. So they die during mating.
They die during mating.
Harsh life for a male bee.
Depending how you
Starve
look
to
at
death,
it, I guess.
Die when you have sex.
Yes.
Rough.
I mean, but also, his genes pass